Depression doesn't take away your ability to function. It takes away your ability to decide to function. That's a meaningful distinction. Because every Friday morning, I call one of my sisters on my way to work. No alarm set, no reminder in my phone. It just happens. Friday, 8:30 a.m., driving, my brain connects the dots automatically. But a few weeks ago, my daughter's daycare was closed. So I stayed home that morning and I completely forgot to call my sister. Didn't even cross my mind until about 4 days later. Now, here's the thing. I didn't forget because I don't care about my sister. I forgot because I removed the trigger. Without the drive to work, there was nothing for my brain to hook the habit onto. The action had no anchor. And I'm sharing that because it is exactly what's happening in the brain when someone is depressed, except the stakes are a lot higher than a missed phone call. When depression sets in, one of the first things that it dismantles in the brain is the ability to initiate, not just motivation, not just mood, the actual biological machinery that gets you started on task. And routines, real structured, predictable routines, are one of the most powerful ways to work around that. Not as a productivity hack or trick, it is actually a clinical strategy. And here's what took me a while to fully appreciate. This isn't just an interesting brain fact. It is the reason why telling someone with depression to just find your motivation might be the most well-meaning but genuinely unhelpful thing you can say. Let me show you what I mean. If you've experienced depression, or if you love someone who has, you know there's a version of it that looks a lot like laziness from the outside. You wake up, you know you need to shower, you know you haven't eaten a real meal, you know you said you'd return that phone call, take that walk, do that one thing that might help, and somehow none of it happens. Not because you don't want to, but because there's a gap between initiation and action that feels impossible to cross. People describe it as a fog, a wall, like your body is on a 5-second delay that never ends. By midday, guilt layers in on top of everything else, because now you're not just depressed, you're also ashamed of not doing the things that you know would help you feel better. And the advice people give doesn't touch it. Make a list, set a goal, find your why. Those are all useful tools for a brain that's operating normally. For a depressed brain, though, they're like handing someone directions when they've lost their steering wheel. Here's what almost nobody explains, though. The reason that gap exists between knowing and doing isn't a character flaw. It's not even really about motivation. It's about something much more specific happening in the brain. And once you understand it, a lot of what you've been experiencing starts to make sense. Here's the biggest misconception I see. And this one matters because it changes everything about how you approach recovery. Most people treat depression like a motivation problem. And I understand why. From the outside looking in, it looks like someone who isn't actually trying. From the inside, it feels like you can't make yourself care. So the solution seems so obvious. Find something to be motivated about. Set a goal. Think positively. Get inspired. But that's not how depression works at the neurological level. And when you approach it that way, you end up with a lot of people trying harder and harder to feel something that their brain chemistry is actively working against. And then concluding that they're the problem when nothing changes. The other mistake I see is waiting around until you feel better before building structure. See, the logic sounds reasonable. Once I feel a little more like myself, I'll start keeping a schedule, exercising, eating right. But that reasoning has it exactly backwards. You don't wait until the engine is running to put the gas in. The structure, the routine is part of what helps the engine to start. It's not a reward for getting better. It is one of the mechanisms of getting better. And social media has genuinely made this harder. There's a lot of content right now about listening to your body, resting when you need to rest, which is all good advice in the right context. But for someone in depression, that framework can quietly give the brain permission to stay stuck. Because what the depressed brain almost always wants to do is less. And less almost always makes depression a lot more worse. Let me explain what's happening in the brain in plain language. Depression affects several systems at once. But for today, we're going to just focus on two of those systems. The first is the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning, for decision making, and initiating action. Think of it as your brain's project manager. In a healthy brain, the project manager shows up every morning, looks at the calendar, and starts handing out assignments. In a depressed brain, the project manager is burned out, disorganized, sometimes doesn't show up entirely. That's why decisions feel exhausting. That's why getting out of bed can feel like an impossible task. It is not weakness. The project manager is genuinely struggling. The second system is dopamine, your brain's anticipation signal. And I want to be precise here because most people misunderstand dopamine. It is not just about feeling pleasure. It's about expecting that something will feel worthwhile. And that expectation is what drives you to start. When dopamine signals are disrupted, which is what happens in depression, your brain stops generating that forward pull. Things that used to feel worth doing just don't. Not because you've changed as a person, but because the signal has decreased. Now, here's where routines become a clinical tool. When you do the same thing at the same time in the same context repeatedly, the brain starts to automate it. Reflex. That's exactly what happened with my sister's phone call. Driving plus Friday plus 8:30 a.m. became one unit in my brain. I didn't need the project manager to show up and make a decision. The environment made the decision for me. That's the brilliant thing about a routine. It offloads the decision entirely. And in depression, every decision is expensive. Every choice costs energy, and the brain doesn't have that energy when you're depressed. So when the alarm at 7 a.m. means go shower instead of decide whether to shower, you've removed a massive cognitive load. You're not relying on motivation, you're relying on momentum. Those are completely two different things. In my clinical practice, one of the things I pay close attention to is what's happened to someone's daily structure right before their depression worsens. Almost universally, when someone's depression is deepening, their routine has already collapsed. Irregular sleep schedule, sporadic meals, the things that they used to do automatically, exercise, connect with people outside, have quietly just fallen away. When I ask patients what caused this collapse, they almost always say the depression got worse first, and then the structure fell apart. But when we trace it back carefully, the structure usually started breaking down before the mood did, and the mood followed afterward. That distinction matters. It's huge because it means routine isn't just a byproduct of feeling better. It is an input into feeling better. I've seen this principle hold up with patients who were openly skeptical that it would not work. And that skepticism is fine because the approach doesn't require you to believe in it. It just requires repetition. The mood follows the behavior. And that's been one of the most consistent things I've observed in practice. The patient who recovers fastest aren't necessarily the most motivated. They're the ones who treat their routines the way a professional athlete treats practice. Not something they do when they feel good, but the thing that eventually makes them feel good. That shift in how you think about structure changes everything. Here's the insight I want you to carry out of this video because I think it reframes the whole problem. Depression doesn't take away your ability to function. It takes away your ability to decide to function. That's a meaningful distinction, because if the problem were ability, rest would fix it. But most people with depression have rested, plenty of rest. The problem is initiation, the gap between knowing what to do and being able to start doing it. Routines solve an initiation problem. They bypass the decision entirely. When your environment is structured to cue the behavior, you don't have to fight your brain to begin. The beginning is already built in. Think back to my sister. On a normal Friday, that phone call required zero willpower, zero cognitive effort. The routine carried me. The day I stayed home, I had plenty of willpower. I just had no anchor. That's the difference between the person who gets up even when they don't feel like it and the person who can't. It's not character, it is architecture. So practically, what does this look like? Start smaller than feels meaningful. The most common mistake is building a routine that is too ambitious. A morning that involves a workout, journaling, a cold shower, a gratitude list. All that sounds great. But for a depressed brain, that's a 10-step decision tree before 8 a.m. Start with one anchor, one thing, one consistent time. A cup of coffee at the same hour every morning. A short walk after lunch. A shower before dinner. One anchor, reliably placed and repeatable. 2, stack new behaviors onto existing ones. Same principle as the sister call, right? Find something you already do automatically and then attach the new behavior to it. After I start the coffee maker, I will take my medication. After I get in the car, I put on the podcast. The existing habit becomes the trigger. You're not building from scratch. You are attaching to an existing habit. 3, protect your wake time above everything else, okay? Your brain runs on a master internal clock, and depression throws it off. Waking up at a consistent time every morning is one of the most primary ways to start resetting it. You don't have to sleep 8 perfect hours, but the wake up time matters more than the sleep time. And it matters every day, including weekends, including the nights that you slept poorly. It is the anchor that anchors everything else. Know that the first week often feels worse, not better. This one catches people off guard. You start a new routine, you do the thing, and you still feel flat. That can feel like proof that it is not working. Right? The brain takes time to update its expectations. That flatness in the first week is normal. Is the brain adjusting? Not the strategy failing, it's just adjusting. So keep going anyway. Number 5, track consistency, not quality. Okay? Don't ask yourself if going on that walk felt good. Ask yourself, did I go on the walk? Right? That's the only metric that matters early in recovery. Did I do it? Yes or no? The feeling catches up later, but only if you're still in the game when it does. And here are some common questions that I receive, okay? I've tried routines before and I still can't stick to it. That usually means that the routine was too complex, too reliant on motivation, or not anchored to anything stable. The fix is almost always simpler. Go smaller and be more anchored to an existing habit. Another question. What if I work irregular shifts and cannot have a consistent schedule? Okay, well, make it a sequence-based routine instead of a time-based routine. Whatever you do first when you get home, do that same thing every single time. Structure built around sequence works just as well as structure built around time. Next question. What if my depression is severe enough that even one small thing feels genuinely impossible? That's a sign that you need clinical support alongside lifestyle tools. Okay, routines are powerful, but they're one part of the picture. They're just one tool in the toolkit. If getting out of bed feels truly impossible, that is worth seeing somebody, a provider, a psychiatrist, and having a real conversation. So, what's the big picture here? All right. Depression shrinks your world. All right. The range of what feels possible gets smaller and smaller. And one of the ways it sustains itself is by dismantling your structure. Because without structure, every day becomes an open field of decisions that the brain just cannot make when you're depressed. When you rebuild your routines, even incrementally, even imperfectly, you're not just adding productivity, you're giving your nervous system a framework to operate inside. You're reducing the cognitive load. You're creating small, reliable moments of completion that signals to the brain movement is still possible. Over time, those anchors, they accumulate. They become the scaffolding that's holding a life together while the deeper healing happens underneath. And if you're watching this at some late hour, not sure why you're still awake, wondering if any of this applies to you, it probably does. The fact that you're still looking for answers means that you haven't given up. Your brain isn't broken. It is waiting for the right architecture. It's not a cure, but it's one of the many foundational tools, many foundational things that you can do to help yourself. And it's available right now, before a prescription is written, before a therapy appointment is scheduled, before anything else. The biggest thing I want you to take away from today is that your brain isn't broken because it cannot generate motivation. It's struggling to initiate. And those are two completely different problems with two completely different solutions. Routine is one of the most underrated clinical tools we have for depression, not because it cures anything, but because it removes the decisions. And for a depressed brain, removing decisions is everything. Okay? Start with one anchor, one thing, same time, same context, every day. If you're in this right now, tell me in the comments, what is the one thing that used to be automatic that depression has made feel impossible for you? I read these comments, and sometimes just naming it, all right, is a kind of an anchor. And if this gave you a different way of understanding what you or someone you love is going through, please share it. Okay? Sometimes the most useful thing is just having language to articulate what you or someone you love is actually experiencing. All right? I'll catch you all in the next one.